You're listening to Carrie Lutz's Financial Survival Network, where you get valuable information you just can't find anywhere else. To thrive in today's trying times, you need the Financial Survival Network, now more than ever. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and get your free newsletter and gift. Financial Survival Network, now more than ever.
Hey, Carrie, this is Robert Ian with ConquerChange.com. This past week, there was a State Department interview with Secretary of State Marco Rubio. I met Secretary Rubio, then Senator Rubio, in 2015, when he was in Las Vegas for Freedom Fest. President Trump had just declared his presidential run for 2016, and was delivering one of his first speeches as a newly minted candidate, along with Rubio, who was running in the primary opposite to Trump. I caught up with Rubio, not at the conference, but at a semi-private local event, where he gave a lengthy, well-articulated stump speech and provided an up-close and personal Q&A session following his talk. Now, fast forward 10 years to the interview he gave this past week, which was all about freedom, and referred to a momentous day in the history of the State Department as the U.S. government begins the process of restoring free speech. Rubio declared, "We have ended government-sponsored censorship in the United States through the State Department." From a timeline perspective, he recapped how following 9/11, the idea was to go after messaging of hostile geopolitical groups trying to radicalize people, which he said at the time sounded plausible. This apparatus was then expanded and escalated to include the idea that there was, quote, interference in the 2016 election. Then, by 2020, he said it evolved into a movement to go after individual American voices. Here's how it worked. The State Department was using NGOs, which stands for non-governmental organizations, and other third-party groups as proxies and pass-through entities, who in turn were tagging and labeling voices in American politics as foreign agents. In other words, the State Department was funding attack dogs to silence American voices, many of whom were deplatformed from social media in the months leading up to the 2020 election, and as a result rendered unable to communicate their ideas and opinions. According to Rubio, the censorship group within the State Department, identified by the host later within the interview as the Global Engagement Center, was disbanded before Trump took office. An archived State Department webpage says the Global Engagement Center closed on December 23rd of 2024. In my opinion, it should state that it conveniently closed on that date. Rubio stated the principle by which the State Department would be operating on a go-forward basis, namely that the best way to counter disinformation is with free speech. He said what's true must have an equal or greater chance to counter what isn't true, in particular when disinformation gets turned into a political weapon, to go after people you don't like. He said every day he watches mainstream media where they put out material they know is disinformation. He cited instances in Western countries right now where people are being arrested for social media posts, with officers sent to their home to tell them they're going to jail for 60 days for posting something online. Going forward, his State Department is defunding and restructuring the censorship unit to share pro-American messaging with the world, not attack and jail citizens for exercising their free speech. An effort is underway to document what happened so it doesn't happen again. He said people in the U.S. who were harmed not only need to know how it happened, but also be able to prove they were harmed, to restore their reputations and livelihoods. He reiterated that 15 years ago, the idea to combat radicalization may have seemed reasonable enough. But in a short amount of time, that process metastasized into what we have today. It was turned into something else, by someone else, when the people in charge changed. He's promised that an in-depth transparency process is underway, not just in high-profile censorship cases, but with many more everyday American citizens who were suddenly labeled. One example is when people were deplatformed near the beginning of the pandemic. He wants to find out who ordered them to be deplatformed, who within the State Department and elsewhere tagged people to be silenced. He said unpacking the depth and scope of what happened will be made known. The interviewer then specifically asked, as the State Department is repositioned as the global beacon for free speech and liberty, threats exist from censorship laws coming out of the European Union, of which many countries have taken the efforts of what he referred to as Global Engagement Center ecosystem partners, many of whom were funded by the U.S. State Department and are now shaping foreign censorship laws. He asked, how will the State Department restore free speech in a world where places like the European Union are targeting Americans and interfering with their free speech? Rubio says the number one priority is Americans. He doesn't want to see an American living in London, for example, post something online about U.S. politics or any politics for that matter, and then suddenly they are facing ramifications in the European Union, like being denied entry into a country or getting arrested because they posted something while living overseas. He said one of the things that's supposed to link us to places like Europe are shared values. One of those values is supposed to be freedom of expression. If that's eroded, then one of the fundamental pillars of that shared interest, beyond military cooperation, is under attack. Apparently, this very issue was raised with the Prime Minister of England when he visited the Oval Office. The mere fact it had to be raised indicates how far the problem has gone and how big it has actually become. He calls it a foreign policy irritant and impediment. I call it escalating totalitarianism that clearly illustrates their philosophical underpinnings. It's not just that censorship saber-rattling is happening with high-profile people, like how the EU commissioning body recently tried to strong-arm and essentially threatened both the president and Elon Musk to not talk about recent protests in the UK. He said everyone is at risk. Citizens, commentators, journalists, everyday people talking about world events, and even office holders in the US. It's a very wide and punitive net that could impact even this discussion on the topic. What I found refreshing, though, and promising about this conversation is the energy and spotlight Rubio is bringing to this critical issue. He underscored the State Department is there to serve the American people and protect their interests, not use stealth and arbitrary power to go after those who disagree for the vague and nebulous concept of misinformation. The approach is not to shut other people down. It's to say, here's how they're lying, and here's the truth. In reality, that's always been the way, until it wasn't. and hasn't been over the past 2 decades of incremental information weaponization. On the surface, it looks like the censorship gun is getting laid down. Or is it? Time will tell. But the good news is we'll be able to tell very quickly. And until next time, this is Robert Ian with ConquerChange.com. Thanks, Carrie.
Thanks for listening to Carrie Lutz's Financial Survival Network, your solution to today's trying times. For the latest, go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Financial Survival Network, now more than ever.